Now, let's take a look at another type of heuristic, and this time let's speak about the availability heuristic. And to kick this off, again, I would like to ask you to take part in a tiny little demo experiment. So this time, this is a demo experiment about frequency judgments. Again, the link to this demo is provided in this video. Okay. If you've taken a moment to take part in this now, and you're back here, you will have seen that I asked you the following question. Which are more common in English, words that begin with the letter R or words that have the letter R as the third letter? And if you take a look at the results, the prediction from the perspective of the availability heuristic would be that more people think that the words that begin with the letter R are more frequent than words that have the letter R as a third letter, while it's actually the opposite way around. Now, why would that be the case? The availability heuristic, or this perspective, would say that assessing the frequency of an event, what we do is we often employ a strategy that's based on the ease or the difficulty with which we can retrieve information about this event, or with which we can generate it. So basically the rule of thumb here is if I can easily imagine it or recall it, I guess it must be more probable to occur. So if I can imagine lots of words that have R as the first letter, that must mean it must actually be more probable that these occur than words that have R as the third letter. Right? And it's just more difficult because of the way that our cognition works. It's more difficult for us to retrieve examples from memory about words that have R as a third letter. And this would then bias our estimates of the probabilities. Similar examples are our risk estimates. So in Russo and Shoemaker, people were asked to estimate what leads to more deaths per year: stomach cancer or traffic accidents, or tuberculosis or fire. And now we have, in this data set, we have actual frequencies of deaths in the US in the 80s. So we have some real numbers to compare this against. And we have participants' estimations of how often these types of deaths occurred. And we also have the information about how often are these types of deaths featured in newspapers. So we can compare estimates against the real numbers. And if we do that, so for stomach cancer versus traffic accidents, you remember that was the first comparison, more people think that traffic accidents are more likely to occur than stomach cancer, while the actual frequency is the exact opposite way around, right? Stomach cancer is the far more likely cause of death in the US in the 80s than traffic accidents. But if we take a look at how often stomach cancer and traffic accidents were featured in newspapers, you can see that stomach cancer doesn't get a lot of press, but traffic accidents do. So this would be basically an example for the availability heuristic at work, because we can see that the estimation of the which type of death is more prevalent actually just correlates with the times it was featured in the newspaper, and we can take times featured in the newspaper basically as as a proxy for how available this type of information, this type of death, is to participants' minds. So if they didn't think about it a lot, they didn't read about it a lot, I guess it would be less probable that it occurs. And now we can do the same thing again for tuberculosis versus fire. What is the estimation that people think are people more likely to think that others die of tuberculosis versus fire? And our estimation here is 23 versus 77%. So people think fires are more likely to occur and to kill people. The actual frequency of deaths in the US from tuberculosis and fire is about the same. But again, featured in the newspaper more often are fires, and much less, or in this case not at all, would be tuberculosis. So again, we can see this match between estimation and availability in the public knowledge. Right. So this might be, kind of a difficult example to imagine, but think about this and as an example for availability heuristics. Who contributes the most to the atmosphere in your house? Well, I would bet that you would say, me, myself, and I'm just the best roommate, or the best, let's say, daughter, because I make sure that when I stay with my parents, I just bring all the joy to them and I make them laugh and so on. Why? Well, we tend to overestimate our own contributions because our own actions are more available to us, right? We just know what we've done. We can usually remember that, and we can often remember it better than what other people have done. So we would call this an egocentric bias, the overestimation of your own actions as compared to the contribution of others. We can also think of the availability heuristic through the lens of self-perception. In this study by Swartz et al. In 1991, participants were asked to report some behaviors where either they were asked to report behaviors where they were assertive or where they were unassertive. And they were asked to give either 6 or 12 examples of these behaviors. And then after reporting these behaviors, the dependent variable here, participants were asked, how assertive are you? So it's basically, they were asked for their perceived own assertiveness. And if we look at the data here, we can see the ratings of own assertiveness, in this case, somewhere between 0 and 8. And now we have this split by whether participants were asked to report assertive or unassertive behavior, and then split again by whether they were asked to give 6 in light blue or 12 in dark blue examples. And what can we see? For people who were asked to provide examples of them being assertive, and they were asked to give 6 examples, they felt themselves more assertive afterwards than if they had been asked to provide 12 examples. And we can see the flip side. People who were asked to provide 12 examples of being unassertive felt personally more assertive afterwards than people who were asked to provide only 6 examples. Now, how does this fit with our availability heuristic? Well, producing 6 examples for something is easier than producing 12 examples, right? So if I produce 6 examples of myself being an assertive person, that comes easy to me. That would mean, in the logic of the availability heuristic, well, it makes it pretty likely that I'm an assertive person. Whereas if I have to produce 12 examples of me being assertive, I would really have to rack my mind to come up with 12 such examples. That's really difficult to do. And that must mean, because it's less available to me, that must mean then that I'm not such an assertive person. And again, the flip side, I can also, we can make the same argument for the unassertive examples. If you ask me to produce 6 examples of where I behaved in an unassertive way, well, I can be very quick and very easily do that. While producing 12 examples of me behaving unassertively, that's kind of more difficult to do. And it's going to make me feel less like I am unassertive, so more assertive overall. Okay, now let's make use of the availability heuristic. I'd like to ask you to do the following. Create a marketing campaign for an item of your choice, could be anything, where you ask customers to write a review for your product. And now take into account what we just learned about the availability heuristic. And in this case, do you think you should ask your customers to write 3 things they love about your product, 10 things they love about your product, or 3 things they hate about your product, or 10 things they hate about your product? Please take a moment to think about this and then come back to the video once you've done it. Now, given what we've just spoken about, what you should do is ask your customers to write about 3 things they love about your product, because that would be easily accessible for them, rather than 10 things they love about your product, because that will be just really difficult to produce, right? 10 features of any product that they are also supposed to love, that's going to be more difficult, and that will lead to lower perceived love for your product. And the other way around, we could also argue that participants, your customers, should rather write about 10 things they hate about your product than 3 things they hate about your product, because it would be more difficult to reproduce 10 things, 10 features of the product that are negative rather than 3, and then 10 things that are negative would lead to a higher perceived liking compared to 3. But now, here we have to use a little bit of common sense and think, okay, perhaps it's not so good if you bring to people's minds exactly why they hate a certain product. But as in this applied case, you would probably rather ask people to stay on the love side of things than to go on the hate route. But if you do have to use the hate route, then at least make it difficult for people so they will feel like they hate very little, and indeed they love a lot. All right, so that was it for the availability heuristic. And again, for the availability heuristic, the main thing to keep in mind is to ask yourselves, how easy is it to come up with examples? How easy is it to come up with the thing that we're asking for? And then this would be rated as the thing that's more likely to occur, or the thing that that people feel like more. Okay. So availability heuristic done. Let's move on to the third type of heuristic that our goal it is to look at today, and that would be anchoring and adjustment.